Due Process, winner of 19 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2010 New York Emmy for our coverage of voting rights, and the 2011 Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Outstanding Discussion Series. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
As safe as we're trying to be, there will be another successful attack. Somebody's going to get through someday.
He led the official inquiry into 9/11 along with his Democratic counterpart, and they're still keeping track of the national response. New Jersey's one-time Governor Tom Kean and former Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton on national security, civil liberties, and the dangers that still remain. Up next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
Chances are none of us has really gotten over 9/11. It changed our collective psyche, our foreign policy, our law enforcement, our world. And yet few of us have lived with 9/11 as constantly as have the senior statesmen who were charged with the task of finding out what happened and why and what should happen next. The 9/11 Commission. I'm Sandra King, and the enormity of its task was really spelled out in the official title, the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States. Former Governor Tom Kean, a Republican, named chair. Former Congressman Lee Hamilton, a Democrat, vice chair. But from the start, Kean made it clear it was to be a partnership. They would work together and lead together. Their report became a surprise bestseller and even made the shortlist for the National Book Award. So when he was named this year's Clifford Case Professor of Public Affairs at the Eagleton Institute of Politics here at Rutgers, we asked him and Kean to spend some time with us at the ITV studio. They agreed, and Raymond had the rare opportunity to engage them in some surprisingly candid conversation.
Governor Kean, let me start with you and ask you an interesting question, at least to me, about the 9/11 Commission. I'm not aware of another commission of a similar type that has done so much to keep itself in the conversation about the subject matter it studied, through report cards, through other mechanisms. Is that unique to this commission as far as you know?
It may be. I remember when we were starting the process of our recommendations, I was in the halls of the Congress, and one of the leaders on the Republican side came over and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "We're working," and they said, "You've expired." And they said, "But we're keeping going." It's unusual, I think. I don't know, Lee's had much more experience than I have in this, in the Congress, obviously, but I don't know of any commission, but we thought it was so important, not just to make recommendations and put them on the shelf, but to try and get those the recommendations implemented, basically for the safety of the American people. So we kept on going.
In fact, you've gone so far as to, in connection with the National Security Preparedness Group and the Bipartisan Policy Organization, to have a scorecard, which here has many colors on it. And Congressman Hamilton, you may not know much about us here at Due Process, but we focus a lot on civil liberties. And in the box for civil liberties and executive power, there's a big red dot, which suggests some dissatisfaction in your most current report with the progress we've made on the civil liberties and privacy issues that you had recommended. Why is that in your view?
Well, we had a very unanimous support for the creation of a Civil Liberties and Privacy Board, because we noticed during our investigation that a lot of power had shifted to the executive branch. A lot of that power was intrusive into the lives of people. The security people won every argument, in a sense, because of the 9/11 and the feeling in the country. And we felt there is necessary to have some pushback on all of that. Now, every agency has a privacy official, but they're not usually high up. We wanted to create a very robust board with powers running across the government, subpoena powers, that would have the authority to say to the FBI director, the CIA director, the defense secretary, look, we understand why you're asking for that power, but let's spell it out and let's keep our eye on it, oversee it, to see that strong power is not abused.
I want to come back and explore that bad grade in a minute, but I got to first maybe contrast it with the fact that overall your assessment is more optimistic about the extent to which the Commission's recommendations have been adopted. Is that a fair statement, Governor?
That's a fair statement. I mean, the country is much safer than it was. The intelligence agencies are talking to each other, which they weren't doing that much before 9/11. The mechanisms are safer, whether we fly, even though we don't like them all. A number of the recommendations we made have been implemented, at least in part. And so that's made us safer. We still have to get it right, and there's still some things we haven't done, and that's what we're concentrating on.
Now, I want to come back to the privacy and civil liberties, because I don't think it's just a bureaucratic notion. Because as Justice O'Connor said even before the Commission, we're in a period of time when you have to measure how much sacrifice you might make of core liberties in order to have security. And so your emphasis at the Commission, while it was on many aspects of intelligence and law enforcement and security, was also designed to give a push. So we've had 6 Congresses and 2 different presidents, and precious little progress on the structure of a Civil Liberties Oversight Board. Is that because the leadership in Washington doesn't itself place a high priority on the civil liberties issue, or believes that the population at large isn't overly concerned about it?
I'm just not sure. I don't know that I've ever encountered anybody that said they're against it. Everybody seems to be for it, but nothing much happens. That was true under the Bush administration. Some things did happen. He got the board set up, didn't provide any budget.
What were your biggest concerns when you focused on having a board like this? What were the biggest kinds of dangers that you saw?
Well, I think the surveillance powers and the intrusion powers of government are very extensive. We've expanded those powers since 9/11, I think for understandable reasons. And it may be that under present circumstances, everything's okay, but the history of power leads you to think that it can be abused. And these are very sensitive matters, of course. People listening in on your phone conversations and the like. So our concern was that civil liberties and privacy be given a seat at the table, and that they be respected.
There wasn't a single commissioner that wasn't in full favor of this.
But on the other hand, Governor, do people often come up to you and raise the civil liberties issue, or are they almost always focused, ordinary folks, on the security questions? Is it too much at the airport? Is it too inadequate here?
Well, for just that reason was why we needed a civil liberty board, because folks are much more concerned about the security apparatus. But, you know, we also were future-oriented. I mean, as safe as we're trying to be, there will be another successful attack. Somebody's going to get through someday. And the Congress will react when that happens. And as they react, maybe with tougher laws or more intrusive laws, we thought there's got to be somebody on the other side of the table. There's got to be somebody saying, yes, but. Well, you can go this far, but aren't you intruding when you go that far?
Let me turn to another area that's a little more controversial, but you've taken a strong position on it. The Commission itself talked about detention policy, talked about the Geneva Convention, the need to have within our international alliances a clear position reflecting Geneva and its requirements. And yet, on Guantanamo, on which you've spoken publicly, in fact, in front of the Senate not too long ago, we've come to kind of a stalemate. The president, after what might have been a clumsy effort to try Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, backed away from public trials, even though the Justice Department said 400 people have been tried for terrorist violations successfully. And the Congress then imposed additional limitations on what the president can do about Guantanamo, while it remains what our military says is a continued source of recruitment for those who are enemies. Why do you think we're stuck there, and can we get off that? Because that would seem to be an area where the recommendations of the Commission, as well as your follow-up, have been completely ignored.
Well, look, this is inherently a very, very tough problem, and it does not fit in due process. You've got a fellow you pick up in Afghanistan in a sweep. You suspect that he's a terrorist. You may even strongly suspect he's a terrorist. You don't have evidence to convict him. What do you do with the guy? If you release him, he can kill you. Okay, how do you handle that case? The fact of the matter is, ordinary rules of due process don't work. What we don't have is a framework statute, and the Congress and the President have not dealt with it. I think it's a kind of a failure of political leadership. It's inherently a very tough problem.
The Congress has been a tremendous obstacle on this issue. The Congress, on an appropriations bill, put many conditions that would limit the president's ability to do what he said he would do, and what, interestingly enough, the military establishment say should be done. I mean, this is not some wild left-wing radical idea. The Congress that you would like to see exercise its power more and be more aggressive in terms of oversight has said nope, and it strikes me that they're looking towards the next election and the hustings, where it's too complicated to explain.
I don't disagree with you. Politically, it's a very tough problem. Now, look, if you ask an ordinary American, what do you do with this guy that you've captured? They don't have much trouble with it. I mean, they have no real concern about due process. But the due process really is a core value. It's a core value, and it's part of who we are as a nation. So I don't know exactly how to solve this problem. I can state the problem, but I don't know how to solve it. But I do know that other countries' people must perceive whatever we put in place as being a fair process. That does not necessarily mean that they have every right that an American citizen might have in a court of law. But it does mean that they be represented by counsel, that they not be held for 20 years without any charge being given against them. It certainly means that they not be mistreated. We spoke very specifically about criticizing torture.
It's not only, as Lee says, these people are caught, suspected of terrorism. There are people in Guantanamo who say, if I get out tomorrow, I will kill as many American citizens as I can, because I believe in that.
But it's been said that there's no political problem you can't solve.
No.
Are you suggesting this one's insoluble?
No, I'm saying insoluble, and Lee is correct. It's the process that we've got to come through. It's not only this problem. It's not only should we have prisons outside the United States. It's whether we should try them in military or civilian courts, whether the president has the right to kill an American citizen who is targeted abroad. I mean, these are all questions where the answers aren't clear, and the one thing we should have is clarity. I mean, I think we as American citizens should, through our political process, come up with a due process answer to all these things. We may not agree with the answer.
We at due process like that idea, but I can't let you just slip in the notion of the president killing an American citizen. Not long before this taping, a drone apparently took the life of a man born in New Mexico, an American national, clearly vituperative in his language and rhetoric against America.
Don't consult with anybody in the killing of Americans. Fighting the devil doesn't require consultation or prayer seeking divine guidance. They are the party of the devils.
Allegations, but no proof by any instrument we know of that he was operational. And there's sort of a leak that maybe there's a memo justifying this under the act that authorized force back in 2001. Are you comfortable that there's a memo that's not publicly debated?
Well, I think you put your finger on one of the problems here with regard to the attack on Al-Awlaki,
right,
is that it was done in secret. And it's still done in secret. We haven't seen that memorandum. And the administration has handled the whole thing very, very close to the vest. So all of us have a lot of suspicions about that. But inherently, it's a very, very tough problem. You cannot imagine a more expansive use of presidential power than to say, Mr. President, you have the power to kill an American citizen without consulting anybody. Now, how do you handle it? I think that you probably should say that the president must get judicial approval. I'm not comfortable saying the president has to consult his advisors because, as somebody said, these advisors are kind of an echo chamber, you know. I do think it would make sense when you put that kind of power in a president that there be some check on it, and I don't know of any other check other than a judge, like you do on surveillance questions.
So we have a FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act courts, which are highly secretive, but are nonetheless judges, Article 3 judges. Yeah. Would you be comfortable with some process? Or let me ask the other way. Are you comfortable with the current process where apparently the president acted with no process at all, as far as we know?
As far as we know. Now, the president did say publicly, I mean, we read it in the newspapers, that Alaki had been targeted for death.
The death of Alaki marks another significant milestone in the broader effort to defeat al-Qaeda and its affiliates.
So it wasn't a surprise, and we then carried it out.
Furthermore, this success is a tribute to our intelligence community and to the efforts of Yemen and its security forces, who have worked closely with the United States over the course of several years.
I'm uncomfortable with it, and I think Lee's solution is the only one I can think of. I mean, as long as there's a judge in the process somewhere, so it's not just a single. Now, Alaki's a bad guy. Major Hassan probably wouldn't have killed those people at Fort Hood.
He's a list of inspired Major Hassan.
Yeah, and a number of other people.
The underwear bomber also.
Underwear bomber, and there were kids that went to Somalia, and one of them.
But isn't the job of leadership to say, this case might be easy, but there's one down the road that may not be?
You always worry about the next case. But that's why I think Lee's right. There has to be somebody else involved.
You ask 99 Americans out of 100, maybe 999 out of 1,000, that they wouldn't have any problem with this. This guy, as Tom said, was a very bad guy. He'd killed Americans. He was planning to kill some more of them. It's a case that makes very hard law to resolve.
So why is not the core leadership of the body politic saying this is an important issue we got to talk about, and even though lots of people are a little more comfortable that this guy's dead, we ought all to be concerned that the United States of America put a man to death without any process?
You're asking an awful lot of a politician. Politically, that's pretty tough.
I think
that suggests at a moment we most need it, that we can't rely on our political leadership.
You're right about that, but the politics is very, very strong.
Yeah, but that's when I think, and maybe the Congress can't do this anymore, but where you start a slow process. And thoughtful people say, let's look at all these issues and see if we can have some hearings and see if we come up with a process and come up with a framework that people can agree on.
But looking back over 10 years at the remarkable work that you did and your continued and aggressive and sometimes annoying efforts to keep it on the front burner, we talked about what seems pretty benign, a board of people to make recommendations about our privacy and civil liberties interests. On Guantanamo, we're stuck in the mud, even though the military is saying it's bad for us. And now we have an instance where there's a vast yawning silence in the middle of this discussion about taking the life of an American citizen without apparent process.
And even,
that suggests...
Even worse than that is the process that Tom is calling for. Discussion, debate, deliberation is not taking place, so far as I can see.
So we have two of the wisest political leaders in the country sitting in our table at due process. And I guess the question is, how do you move ahead into the direction of looking at the tough questions? Because the easy questions are always done with aplomb.
Well, I don't know what the lawyers are saying about it. I don't know what the law schools are doing about it. I don't know if they're looking into this question and trying to find a reasonable solution to it, but I hope they are, because it really genuinely is a tough problem, and one that we ought to address if we're concerned about due process.
Now, let me go to something that's a little more confusing to me. Even I don't have a position on this one. But my intelligence tells me it's not so great that you gentlemen have had the opportunity to explore the question of these fusion centers that have come about as the result of some of the recommendations you made about intelligence. Is that true, and can you tell us what a fusion center is?
Well, there are 72 fusion centers that have been set up around the country. They are organizations which contain the primary law enforcement people, local, state, and federal, in a given area or region or state. And the whole purpose of them is to share information about suspicious activity. Some are working rather well, some rather poorly.
You're aware that there's been some criticism of the fusion centers. Yeah. The Cato Institute did an analysis, which it compiled some of the wilder recommendations that have come out, surveilling Muslims because they're lobbyists, people on both sides of the abortion debate, supporters of Ron Paul. I mean, some things that seem strange, and you've had a profusion of reports, which even some super consumers have suggested is kind of hard for anybody to really digest, which raises both questions of oversight, control, and whether or not this is a process that's out of hand. The Washington Post did an in-depth study that lasted almost 6 months of whether there were issues. Are there issues with the fusion centers, or is that misunderstanding or lack of intelligence?
I think one of the issues, and Lee and I have talked about this, who's in charge? I mean, who's in charge of these fusion centers? In New Jersey, all our emergency preparedness is under the state police. I visited New Jersey one. They weren't talking about terrorism or anything else. We were in the middle of a crisis because of a flood. And everybody in state government was coordinating their efforts through that fusion center. And it worked very, very well. And I think because of that fusion center's existence under the leadership of the state police, people's lives were saved. I mean, it was that simple.
The fusion center brings together the key actors in a state or region to examine the question of possible terrorism and to look into all the reports. Everybody's at the table who should be there. Now, 72 of them, you're not going to have everybody doing everything exactly right.
But some of the criticism seems to come from fairly solid sources. I mean, Cato is respected. But let me come to a question about your beloved, and I don't mean to pick on the Congress, but you can pick yourself. Has there been robust...
But you have been.
Have I been? Has it been unfair? Has it been due process?
No, I've basically been in agreement with you.
But has Congress really taken the lead in looking at these centers and having hearings, maybe part public, part executive session?
I think in some of the subcommittees of the Homeland Security Committee in the House, I know, have been looking into them.
Over 100 committees have jurisdiction over Homeland Security. Janet Napolitano and her deputies have got to testify to 100 different committees or more. That's time taken away from protecting us. It's takes time away from consolidating the department. It takes time away from everything. And I think that was a prime recommendation she made to us. Can you do something about that? Yeah. As did Chertoff, as did Ridge. All three of them say that's one of the biggest problems as far as their ability to run that department and do their job.
It's a department, it's a work in progress.
Okay. Let me end, if I can, with a question that is a challenge to your wisdom and leadership. And I don't mean that in the least bit sarcastically. I think most of the nation has applauded the extent to which you've brought some bipartisan understanding to a level that has the potential and often is riven by partisan and other, and I don't mean just Democratic and Republican, but other kinds of partisan and sectarian divides. But at the end of the day, I read an article recently in which a guy suggested, let's assume the president said, fusion centers are really not working. Let's cut $42 billion out of the budget. We'll save money. We'll move on to something else. And there's an attack the next day. He's finished. That is, that somehow it's almost never safe for somebody in a position of responsibility to advocate reducing size, taking money out of some security apparatus without regard to the merits. That is, that somehow we've gotten into a cycle where there isn't mature assessment of options, but rather a kind of party line, again, not Democratic, Republican, but kind of knee-jerk response.
The security people win every argument. So, and no politician is going to, look, you got a problem presented to the president, and they tell you the threat.
But is that a dead end? Here's the question. Is that a dead end? If the security people win every argument, it seems to me that that's a dead end for imaginative thinking and long-term survival.
It is, and you've got to get some pushback on it. Now, the good thing that is happening here, you've gone on a long time since 9/11, 10 years. Recently, when Tom and I have testified before the congressional committees.
We're very pleased to have the opportunity to be here with you once again today.
For the first time, they're asking questions about cost effectiveness. That's the start. You got to begin to ask questions about cost effectiveness. It hasn't blossomed into anything beyond that now, but 2 years, 5 years ago, they wouldn't have asked that question.
Governor Kean, do you share the Congressman's, I think, optimistic assessment of the body politics resiliency in dealing with these issues at which security currently seems to win every argument?
Well, it's not only security. You know, it's very hard to get rid of any government agency. Right? I mean,
so you sound like an anarchist.
Well, I've been called worse. but no, it's very, very difficult. I would be a defender of the fusion centers because of what I've seen that done in New Jersey. But I think it's just very, very difficult whenever you challenge any incumbent agency.
I want you to know it's been a privilege to have you both, and I hope you'll come back and join us once again sometime.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you.
We were, frankly, surprised at their candor, their willingness to take the former and current administrations to task, to agree on most everything despite their difference of party. Since they hadn't been willing to just drop their report and walk away, continuing to insist on reforms they had called for, we knew there would be some blunt talk. But their insistence that there's no solid check on civil liberties violations, their condemnation of the assassination of Alaki, those were some things we may not have expected. And they're all the more reason for our sincere thanks to Congressman Hamilton and Governor Kean, and to the Eagleton Institute. Our thanks also to you for watching Due Process. If you've missed any episodes or you just want to see them again, you can catch them on youtube.com/DueProcessTV, and you can check us out at facebook.com/DueProcessTV. For Raymond and all of us here, I'm Sandra King. We'll see you next week on Due Process.
We had a very unanimous support for the creation of a Civil Liberties and Privacy Board, because we noticed during our investigation that a lot of power had shifted to the executive branch. A lot of that power was intrusive into the lives of people. We wanted to create a very robust board with powers running across the government, subpoena powers, that would have the authority to say to the FBI director, the CIA director, the defense secretary, look, we understand why you're asking for that power, but let's spell it out and let's keep our eye on it, oversee it, to see that strong power is not abused.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.